Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Streamlabs All-Star. Tonight we're going to talk about the Yellow Vest protests, which are picking up steam in France and are beginning to spread outside the borders of France. And what I want to point out to you is how the global media is completely misrepresenting and lying about these protests. First of all, they're much, much bigger than you're seeing indicated in the media. They're considerably bigger. They're taking place in literally scores, hundreds of towns all around France. It's not only taking place in Paris, and in fact, a lot of the activity that's taking place in Paris is not actually related to the Yellow Vest protests at all. It's just the shall we say, New French and Antifa trying to take advantage of the situation to stir up additional trouble like they always do. The first thing that you need to understand is it's not about the gas taxes. If you notice, Macron has already come out and said that they're not going to implement the tax now, and yet this hasn't even dented the enthusiasm or the spread of the protests. What it's really about is opposition to globalism in France. What it's really about is the French government being more loyal to the European Union and to globalism and to immigration than to the French people. And so this is a direct revolt against the French globalist government. And so, there's a lot of misrepresentation of this because it is going to severely weaken the globalist cause elsewhere. France is the heart of the EU experiment, and they were actually the poster child, the poster nation for the whole idea of multiculturalism. The French national team, quite a bit of which was not French at all, was the World Cup champions, and this was supposed to be a big demonstration of how multiculturalism and mass migration is successful and is the natural and obvious successor to the historical nation state. And so there's a tremendous amount of disinformation that people in general and Americans in particular have been subjected to. Now, you may recall that I've been telling Americans for years that you have no idea whatsoever about what is happening in Europe. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people going, "Oh, Europe is dead. Europe is gone. There's no hope for Europe." And I kept pointing out, look, the percentage of immigrants, the percentage of non-Europeans, the percentage of Muslims is something like 1/7 the number of Mexicans and other Hispanics in the United States. You can't even compare the two. And also the European nation states are in much better shape because they have a coherent sense of nation. The French know what France is. Americans don't. Most Americans don't even understand that they're not Americans at all, that they're not posterity. They're U.S. citizens, but they are they are and they have been civic nationalist for a long time. And also, they have been targeted by the civic nationalists and the, for lack of a better term, American revisionists much longer than any of the European countries have. I mean, yes, we're starting to see the whole idea. We've actually seen Britain is a nation of immigrants, and the whole black British, black Roman British thing that Mary Beard has been trying to push, and the BBC's been trying to push. You're also seeing, we've also seen that in Sweden. Sweden is a nation of immigrants, but it's bullshit. I mean, it's the difference is there is a element of truth to it in the United States. Now, it's not true that the original Americans, the posterity Americans, were not immigrants. They did not become part of the Indian tribes. They were settlers. They were conquerors. They were colonists. But they were not immigrants. And so when you look at, it's true, like it or not, as much as Americans like to think of themselves as being the land of the free and the home of the brave, the United States is the center of globalism. It's the epicenter of globalism. And one of the reasons that we're seeing the European countries stand up the way that they are is because of the election of Donald Trump. Trump may not be a genuine nationalist. He may not even be a posterity American, but he is a genuine civic nationalist. He's not a globalist. He doesn't really, he doesn't endorse at all the idea that America should be at the forefront of world revolution, not even world democratic revolution, as the neocons have rebranded their Trotskyite globalization program. And so, when you look at what is happening here, a lot of it is confusing to Americans because they have been subjected to so much anti-European propaganda. Think about the very term cheese-eating surrender monkey. Okay? When and where was that popularized? That was popularized during the Iraq War by National Review. And the whole reason that they were claiming that the French were cheese-eating surrender monkeys is because the French refused to get involved in the NATO attack on Iraq. They weren't surrendering at all. In fact, France was refusing to go along and surrender to the globalist, neocon, US-led agenda. And so Dream Eater says, according to recent estimates, 85% of the French population is ethnic European. In the US, that number is about 62%. So it is a little bit ironic that Americans, say, oh, Europe is so doomed because I was in Paris and I saw some Muslims. The ironic thing is that we went to Rome with some friends from Minneapolis 5 years ago, and they were kind of shocked to discover that there were far fewer Muslims in Rome than there was in Minneapolis. And so, if you look at this confusion, if you look at this propaganda, you notice it's all coming from the same place and it's all serving the same purpose. It is all meant to demoralize nationalists. And it's meant to, if you look at it, they're trying to make Americans think that, Europe is doomed so that they don't do anything about what's happening in the United States. And so it's interesting that now France has its own challenges, just so you understand. They have their own form of civic nationalism, but whereas the United States has magic dirt civic nationalism, you were born on U.S. soil, therefore you're an American. The French version of civic nationalism is linguistic. If French is your mother tongue, then you are French. And so, and that's a challenge that they're going to have to deal with. And so the interesting thing when you look at this is, because of the parliamentary system and because of the stronger sense of nationalism, because they have the language, they have the culture, and they have the ethnicity, whereas in the United States, you don't really have any of those things that are quite as strictly limited as in any European nation. It's more of a challenge in the U.S. And so what Americans should not be doing is looking at Europeans with contempt because they happen to have occupied capital cities. London is bad. Paris is bad. But you also need to keep in mind that Washington, D.C. is not the United States. So, we didn't go. We actually were planning to go to France, I think it was last weekend. And we didn't go because we knew about the protests. We weren't going anywhere near Paris, but we knew that the protests were going to be a problem at the border and might be a problem where we were going. So we just decided, we'll just do it some other time. But the point is that, this was something that we all knew, everybody knew. And yet I was really surprised when I read the first reports about the Yellow Vest protests, and it all seemed to be focused on Paris, and it was all very unclear if it was Antifa or what it was. And so that's when I realized that the global media was actively misleading people as to what's going on. Let me give you some actual information from, if you go to the blog, you can see that there's some information from people that are actually there in Paris. But okay, here we go. Lots of people demonstrated in downtown Bordeaux on Saturday, at least 3 times the number of the preceding Saturday. The prefect of police had prohibited the demonstration, and that discouraged a lot of people, except on November 27th, the cops had accompanied the crowd. There were numerous injuries since the police chose to block the marchers and use tear gas and flashballs. Leftists managed to insinuate themselves into the crowd, but demonstrators kicked them out. Same things with the trade union folks who arrived with cars and loudspeakers and got booed and ran away. This is a time of heated revolt, of refusal of what the government wants to impose upon us, financial suffocation of working people and retirees under the false pretext of climate change. Don't give an inch. We are the country. We are France. They have to go back. Interesting, isn't it? They're using precisely the language that we used in the war in Paris. Because this whole movement, this whole spirit of revolt is palpable. People are furiously angry because they can barely make ends meet, and yet they see immigrants getting free housing that is equal to or better than their own. They see them getting free passes to their workout clubs, to their fitness clubs. They see them being handed everything, and they know they're paying for it, and they can't afford to pay their own bills because of the taxes being used to transfer money to all the people invading their country. I mean, it's perfidious. It's terrible. And so, let me read you some more. Okay, so, yeah, this is being led by the Ligue du Midi. You probably haven't even heard of this in the global media, but one of the primary organizations is the Ligue du Midi, and there's also the Republican Resistance. Interesting choice of words, because as you know, the Republicans were the fought against the Nazis, the resistance in World War II. He says, next Saturday, which is the coming Saturday, the 8th, will be the final culmination. Things are going to come to a head. Saturday, it will be we who have the stranglehold, the upper hand on all this stuff. It is we who are going to decide what will happen. Law enforcement will end up joining us. And we're already seeing this. We've already seen that the paramedics, that the firefighters, and the police are beginning to join the people. The military is not going to move against these people. And so my guess is that this is designed to stop France from signing that UN Migrant Pact. And so they're also directly comparing Macron to Marie Antoinette. His new nickname is the Brown Plague. There's even a popular cartoon going around saying Marie Antoinette is saying, "Let them eat cake," and Macron says, "If they don't want to pay the fuel tax, let them buy an electric car." So the point is that the French globalist government is as out of touch with the people as the last French king and his queen were before the French Revolution. And so, what we are seeing here may be the early stages of the end of the Fifth Republic. And that would be a very, very good thing, because the end of the Fifth Republic will also bring about the end of the EU. I mean, you can be absolutely certain that the Italians are watching what's going on very closely. Now, the Italians are not in a similar state. People have asked me about that. The Italians already have a nationalist government. It's not entirely nationalist because it's an alliance between the left-wing Movimento Cinque Stelle, the movement 5 stars, and La Liga. But La Liga is the more, even though they were they won slightly fewer votes, their trend is so strong that they're essentially the senior partner, even though they have fewer seats in parliament. And even though Cinque Stelle holds the prime ministership, it's actually the interior minister, Matteo Salvini, who is the more powerful, more popular figure. And he is a strong nationalist. And so, what we're going to see is more and more people joining this, more and more people rising up, more and more people putting on the yellow vest. Because, and what I think is interesting is, obviously I missed that when, keep in mind that this comic, The War in Paris, was published only, 2 months ago? And so what's interesting is that I had thought it was going to be more focused around Generation Identitaire, which you'll notice the black and yellow signs. I don't think it's an accident that the yellow vests and that the colors of the movement are black and yellow, because I suspect it's closely related to Generation Identitaire. But this is actually bigger than I expected. This is the movement is already bigger and stronger than I had anticipated when I wrote The War in Paris. And so, if you're interested in this stuff, you should check it out. Alt Hero, you can find it at archavencomics.com. You can find it at Amazon. But nationalism is rising around the world. The neoliberal world order has completely failed. Jordan Peterson and his attempt to teach young men that group identity is pathological and that nationalism is an evil relic of the past and that you should isolate yourself in your own head and just really work on improving yourself and let your nation go to hell. These messages are failing, and globalism is failing. And the neoliberal world order has already failed. And so, when you say what can I do? What can we do? Look at what they're doing. No leaders, no leadership. They are simply refusing to play along with the game anymore. And that's the one thing that the globalists absolutely require. They absolutely need everybody to do what Jordan Peterson says. Just clean your room, be a good boy, don't cause any trouble, and leave all the thinking up to us. And so, so what you need to do is you need to stop playing along. I mean, yes, the globalists' next move probably is to crash the economy. But the economy was going to crash anyhow. I mean, a crash is overdue. In France, do you think Marine Le Pen would be the best choice? Except immigration, she has a lot of leftist policies. Marine Le Pen is not the best choice. Her niece is actually much better. And so, she's also a Le Pen. She's the younger, prettier one who looks kind of like Phoebe on Friends. But she's a mother. She's a Catholic. And she's a stronger nationalist than her aunt. Let's see. If I want your production suggestions, I'll ask. Okay, give it up. Let's see. What's the likelihood of this movement leading to the mass deportation of immigrants in France? I think it's going to happen regardless of how this particular situation comes to an end. It would be nice if it did, but we can't count on it. And so, but the important thing is, don't believe what you hear in the globalist media. They lie to you. They absolutely lie to you. Look at how completely they have misled you about what's happening with these yellow vest protests. These are protests in defense of Western civilization in general and France in particular. And so, what is the likelihood of these protests spreading to other countries, namely the USA? That's up to you guys. There are no leaders of this thing. Nobody is sitting there, moving the pieces, calling the shots. People are simply going out and taking action. And unlike the Tea Party, they're not just trying to get media attention so they can show off what good little boys they are and how they leave everything cleaner than they found it. I mean, the Tea Party was pathetic, absolutely pathetic. And they allowed themselves to get co-opted by fake leaders. Maybe that will happen. I don't know. So it's if there is civil war, is Silicon Valley one of the most dangerous places? I don't know, but I wouldn't want to be in California at all. It's you have to. Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Justin Carpenter says, wear a yellow vest with a "Don't tread on me" snake. That would be a useful symbol. So, was the Tea Party really just implicit white identity? It was, well, it was implicitly, but it was basically white identity that refused to recognize itself. The Tea Party was a perfect example of the challenge that the U.S. faces in terms of coming to terms with its own nationalism. A lot of Tea Party people were super proud of the fact that they had a couple token blacks, they had a couple token Hispanics or Asians or whatever. But that's not relevant at all. If you're still thinking in those terms, if you're still thinking in terms of counting minorities and thinking that they're going to be on your side, you're completely missing the point. Your perspective is woefully off. Because, as Lee Wan-Q said, all politics in a multi-religious or multi-ethnic society are identity politics. Notice that he didn't say democracy. In any society, different identity groups compete for power because everybody wants their own culture, their own traditions, and their own way of living to be the societally dominant one. That's why the current dominant force hates Christianity, hates Christians, can't even bear Christmas. That's why you're constantly seeing any. I was watching a commercial today. It was for Pepsi, and it was playing a non-Christian Christmas song. So just I think it was a rock version of Jingle Bells. Jingle Bells is a Christmas song, but it's not a Christian Christmas song. There's no reference to anything Christian in it. And so, but then they're talking about establish your new tradition for the holidays. And they're referring to Christmas because it's playing Jingle Bells, but these were people who were going out and surfing for Christmas. That's their holiday tradition at Christmas time. And what it's all intended to do is to sever the link between this holiday that they can't get rid of and Christianity. They want to hide the fact that Christmas is a celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. Is the war against Christmas as advanced in Europe as it is in the USA? It's not as advanced, but it is definitely ongoing. There's like all these commercials in Britain. It's all about, celebrate the holidays however you want. And then they show a Muslim family and a African family and then a British family and, actually celebrating it the way that the Brits actually, have historically celebrated it. And so, it is all by design. That's why they don't just want to get rid of Merry Christmas, and they don't want to just get rid of Hark the Herald Angels Sing. They want to get rid of the fact that you actually celebrate a holiday on Christmas, on December 25th. And so, that's why they love terms like Turkey Day. Black Friday is the real holiday. Cyber Monday. They just want you to stop thinking about Thanksgiving because you're giving thanks to God the Father. They want you to stop thinking about Christmas. And all of this stuff is connected. All of this stuff is connected. There is a direct connection between the war on Christmas, the popularity of Jordan Peterson, the Yellow Vest protests, the fact that these videos are shadow banned, the fact that Owen Benjamin got kicked out of Hollywood. All of these things are connected. And what it all comes down to eventually, and people, I understand a lot of people don't like this. A lot of people get uncomfortable with it. But it really ultimately comes down to, do you worship Satan or do you worship Jesus? And what that really comes down to is a very simple question. Do you bend the knee before Jesus Christ or not? And, this battle goes on everywhere. It's not an accident. In Holland, they're trying to get rid of the Black Pete tradition because it's racist. Black Pete is Santa's helper, and he's all black because he's the one who actually crawls up and down. In the Dutch tradition, Sinterklaas does not climb up and down the chimney. It's Black Pete who does. And so that's why he's black, because he's all covered with soot. But there have been protests and demonstrations and all this, almost all of them by the New Dutch, who are protesting, trying to ban Black Pete because in the name of racism. All this stuff is connected. It's all the same. Colonel says, if you're not a Christian, you are a Satanist. That's not quite fair. It's not, there's a difference. There is definitely a difference between somebody being an active Satanist, a active, true believing Luciferian or whatever, an occultist. There's a huge difference between that and somebody who just doesn't find the ability to believe in Jesus Christ. But what I'm saying is that the more that you look at the holistic picture, the more that you see all of the connections between all of these very divergent events taking place at the same time all over the world, the less you're able to escape it. The less you're able to deny the reality of evil and the fact that the world is fallen and the fact that it is ruled over by an immortal, murderous psychopath. And so, I get that it's hard to believe. I get that it's impossible for some of you to believe. I'm not at all unsympathetic to your skepticism, to your doubts, and to you're finding it hard to believe. But all I would ask you is, how are we able to so accurately predict what's going to happen? How was I able to know that the EU was going to come together? And remember, it was just a free trade pact. No, there's no plans for, why would we ever try to merge nations and so forth? We knew it was going to happen because we know what the plan for global evil is. However, we also, just so you understand, this is not a black pill. The reality is that they will not be successful in destroying the nations. How do we know that? Because again and again in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it talks about the nations. And so what that tells us is that, like previous attempts to build a single global government and use it to challenge God, these attempts too will fail. And we're already seeing them fail. In the yellow vest protests, we are seeing them fail. In the Brexit vote, we are seeing them fail. Yes, they win battles. Yes, they make progress. Technology has permitted them to make progress like never before. It was a lot easier to keep millions of Muslims out before they could hop on a plane and fly over in 2-3 hours. But technology doesn't trump God. So, we'll have to, and if you, Linjin says, I have a problem with Jesus, the 33-year-old hippie virgin who committed suicide by centurion. Worshipping impotence is not good. But see, you're making the same mistake that the Apostle Peter made. The Apostle Peter drew his sword and was willing to fight. He actually attacked one of the men who came to take Jesus away. And how did Jesus rebuke him? How did he said, first of all, he said, put up your sword. Then he healed the guy's ear, which, if you think about it, is a weirdly specific thing if this is just a story that somebody made up, if I was writing the story for dramatic purposes, I would not have somebody cut an ear off and then have it magically healed. At least kill 1 or 2 people and then have him raise him from the dead. That synchronicity with the eventual raising of the dead of Christ would be much more satisfying from a literary sense. Anyhow, beside the point. But the thing is that Jesus says to Peter, look, I can have, 2 legions, which, if you think about it, would be, or I can't remember what the exact number is, but that would be like 12,000. He says, I can have 2 legions of angels show up here and wipe everybody out, but that's not my job. Jesus was sent willingly as a scapegoat. In order to free man from the immortal psychopath, a price had to be paid. And that is why we recognize Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior as Christians, because he paid the ransom. He paid the price. He couldn't do it. That's not an act of impotence. Do you call it impotence when a Marine jumps on top of a grenade to save his platoon or to save his squad mates? No, that's not impotence. That's sacrifice. That's self-sacrifice. And you should never, ever confuse self-sacrifice with cowardice or with impotence or with being a slave mentality. It's not. It's the precise opposite. Let's see. But God is responsible for this whole situation. Why would God change his mind about his creation? He hasn't. That's the point that so many people seem to get stuck on. And for me as a game designer, it's really hard for me to understand why this is a issue at all. Think about it like a game designer. What does a game designer do? Does he sit there and create everything so that it all goes precisely the way that he wants it to? No. He sets up a few basic rules and then he lets it go. That's what God does. He intervenes occasionally, but most of the time he allows the playing pieces to have their free will. Now, keeping in mind, my perspective is a little unusual among Christians because I do not believe in divine omniscience. I do not believe that the Bible claims there is any reason to believe in divine omniscience. In fact, if you actually read the Bible, you will see that it repeatedly says that God does not know certain things. Now, I subscribe to a concept of my own making. It's a word of my own coining. I call it tantitions. It means God knows as much as he wants. If he wants to intervene, he can. If he wants to know, he can. But that doesn't mean that he chooses to. And if you think about it, claiming that God must be omniscient is infinitely more limiting of God than the concept of tantitions. And so if you want to blame God for, not turning humanity into a puppet show, that's fine, but I don't think that that's anything to criticize him for. I mean, how free can we be if we're not free to be evil? Do you believe in hell? Yes. Let's see. Vox, it looks like evil is losing. These people are resentful NPCs who have no soul, no families, and are losers at life. In some areas, yes, but in some ways that is a triumph of evil. God doesn't want people to be like that. We don't want people to be like that. Why does the West need Christianity? Why isn't the Greco-Roman legacy enough? It's very simple, because the world is fallen, and because the only way that you can stand effectively against that psychopathic ruler of the world is with the power granted by Jesus Christ. He's not allowed to mess with Christians. He's not allowed to mess with those who are, who stand against him in that way. That doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to you, but it does mean that, you're not going to be subject to the same sort of penalties that his servants are subjected to when they break their agreements. I like these. Okay, look, you guys, don't give me these ignorant, you're way off base. Okay, millionth username. I want you to read the Bible and compile a list of how many times God says something that clearly indicates that he doesn't know something versus how many times he claims to be omniscient. Count those up. Let's see. God didn't make the world this way, we did. That's true. But let's go back to the main topic, which is the Yellow Vest protest. The main thing that I want you to understand, the main thing that I want you to keep in mind is that you cannot get a clear picture from the global media. You cannot get a clear picture from the mainstream. The picture that you have of what's going on in Europe is no more accurate than the idea that Europeans have that there are 3 cities in America, or actually 4 cities in America, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and Texas, and that all Americans are either rappers or cowboys. Okay? That's what they think of America. And the picture that you have of Europe is almost as inaccurate. So just keep in mind that it is, what's happening is not necessarily, what's happening is you're getting only about 5% of the picture, and they are using that 5% to mislead you. So look deeper, look to find direct sources. There are plenty of English speakers posting in English about this, about what's going on in Paris, about what's going on in Bordeaux. Keep an eye on what happens on the 8th. It appears that might be a date of some significance. And so I would encourage you to look at what's happening and learn from it. So before I forget, remember that Jordanetics is now out in paperback. I would highly recommend checking that out if you haven't read it yet. It's available in Kindle. It's also available in paperback. And also, if you're interested in the Alt Hero Q campaign, you can go to archavencomics.com, and it's running for another 3 weeks or so. So have a good evening. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream. Don't forget to bring your yellow vest.